Welcome, dear listener, to a night where every shadow has a secret and every whisper hides a truth. A cold mist curls around an English manor as laughter and candlelight spill from its tall windows. Inside, a glittering dinner is underway, 8 guests, polished silver, and laughter just a little too loud. But there's one detail no one notices until it's far too late. The table is set for 9. Then, a mysterious woman appears, claiming a seat no one prepared for her. She smiles, speaks little, and before the night is over, she will be found lifeless beneath a portrait of the host's late husband. What secret did she bring with her? What truth was so dangerous it followed her to the grave? You're about to find out if you dare. Tell us, where are you listening from tonight? Would you have taken that 9th chair? Let us know in the comments. Because in this story, even the dead have a voice. It was a night of elegance and unease at the Charnwood estate, a manor of old English dignity standing proud against the November mist. Inside, the chandelier's golden light bathed polished mahogany and crystal in a warm, deceptive glow. The guests had gathered for what Lady Charnwood called a small, intimate dinner, though there was nothing small about the event. Wealth and influence had a way of filling even the largest rooms. At the head of the table sat Lady Helena Charnwood, regal and sharp-eyed, her silvery hair pinned with diamonds. Across from her, her son Adrian fidgeted with his napkin, every inch the restless air. Between them were the guests, a financier, a playwright, a doctor, a widow, and an unexpected 9th seat. It was not until the 2nd course that Lady Charnwood noticed it. "There should be 8, she murmured softly, frowning at the extra place setting gleaming in the candlelight. "Mrs. Vale, did you?" But Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, looked bewildered. "I set for 8, milady." Laughter covered the awkwardness. "A ghost, perhaps," chuckled Lionel Grant, the playwright, his voice too loud. "An extra guest from beyond." Yet no one could quite explain how the chair came to be filled, for as the servants poured wine, a woman none of them had seen before entered the dining room. Dressed impeccably in ivory silk, she smiled with serene composure and said, "I hope I am not too late." Lady Charnwood, startled yet too well-bred to cause a scene, inclined her head. "Not at all. Do forgive me, But she stopped. The stranger had already taken the vacant seat. Her eyes, an unsettling grey, seemed to study each person in turn, with an expression that hovered between amusement and pity. Dinner resumed, awkwardly, as though everyone silently agreed to pretend she belonged. None wished to admit they didn't know her. And yet, later, when the clock struck 10 and coffee was served, Lady Charnwood rose to propose a toast only to find the 9th guest gone. Gone without a trace. The servants swore she had not left through the front or back. Her glass was untouched, her chair empty, and on the tablecloth, where her hand had rested, was a faint ring of water, perfectly circular, perfectly cold. It was 2 hours later, when Adrian Charnwood went to retrieve a forgotten shawl from the gallery, that he found her again, lying motionless beneath the portrait of his late father. Dead. The scream that echoed through Charnwood Hall shattered the quiet formality of the night. Adrian's voice, ragged, disbelieving, drew the household into a storm of confusion. The guests came rushing from the drawing room, silk and jewels glittering like ghosts beneath the trembling chandeliers. And there, beneath the somber portrait of Lord Charnwood, lay the woman in ivory silk, her face pale as marble, her eyes half open, as though she still watched the living with faint reproach. Lady Charnwood clutched the banister, her breath catching. "Who is she?" she whispered, her tone one of both fear and outrage. "Who invited this woman into my house?" No one answered. The servants exchanged terrified glances. The guests murmured denials. No one knew her. Not one soul in the great manor claimed her name. Inspector Hughes of the local constabulary arrived within the hour, a broad, practical man with little patience for the macabre. He questioned, measured, Noted, but every question yielded only the same absurd truth. The woman had appeared from nowhere, dined with them in silence, and died beneath a portrait of a man dead 5 years. Heart failure, perhaps, he muttered. Some intruder, poor creature, overcome by nerves or fear. Happens more than you'd think. But even as he spoke, something in the room felt wrong, terribly wrong. The air itself seemed heavy with withheld truth. And that was when the sound of a motorcar echoed outside, measured, refined, deliberate. The butler hurried to the door, and in stepped a small, immaculate figure in a grey overcoat, his moustaches gleaming like polished silver. "Ah, bonsoir," said Hercule Poirot, inclining his head politely. "I fear I arrive unfashionably late." Lady Charnwood blinked. "Monsieur Poirot? But how?" "I was invited," he replied, handing her a crisp note. "By you, madame. Or so it appears. Yet I suspect," and his eyes glimmered with quiet amusement, "that the writer of this invitation is not quite the lady before me." He looked around, studying every face, every flicker of movement. "It seems, mes amis, I am not the only guest tonight who should not have been here." The silence that followed was electric. Poirot's gaze lingered briefly on the dead woman, then on the portrait looming above. "Curious," he murmured softly. "She chooses to die beneath her host's late husband. Tell me, was he much loved?" Lady Charnwood's composure cracked. "He was admired," she said carefully. "A good man, generous, respected." "Admired," Poirot repeated, as though tasting the word. "And yet one rarely dies beneath the portrait of mere admiration." He turned to the inspector. "You have found nothing to suggest violence?" "None," said Hughes. "No mark, no wound, no poison detected, though the doctor says he'll know more by morning." Poirot nodded slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "Then we must consider another form of poison, perhaps the poison of the mind." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Poirot's eyes flicked over each of them in turn. Adrian, pale and trembling. Lionel Grant, whose nervous laughter had returned, brittle as glass. Dr. Fernley, watching too quietly. Mrs. Vale, wringing her hands. Every one of them seemed to breathe too carefully, speak too cautiously. Poirot's tone softened. "You see, mon cher inspector, people often die twice, once when their heart ceases, and once when their secret is found. It is that second death that concerns me tonight." He examined the scene minutely, the faint impression of her glass untouched, the damp ring on the tablecloth, the faint scent violets, but tinged with something bitter. His fingertips brushed the woman's wrist gently, then the pearls at her throat. "Fake," he said softly. "Very good imitations, but not genuine. Tell me, Lady Charnwood, do you recall if she wore those when she entered?" I believe so," Lady Charnwood stammered. "Ah." Poirot's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Then she knew she would not leave with them." The inspector frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning," said Poirot, straightening, "that our visitor came prepared for her own disappearance or for someone else's." He turned toward the guests, his gaze precise, unyielding. A woman does not walk into a dinner uninvited, sit among strangers, and die quietly beneath a family portrait without reason. No, this is theatre. Someone in this house is the playwright. Adrian's eyes widened. "You think someone here knew her?" "I think," said Poirot, his voice silken steel, "that every one of you knows her in some way, only not as she appeared tonight. She has worn another name, another face, perhaps even another role. But make no mistake, this woman was no stranger to Charnwood Hall." Lady Charnwood swayed, and Poirot offered his arm gently. "Courage, madame. The dead cannot harm us, only the living may do that." He paused, his gaze lingering on the faint outline of muddy footprints near the door. "Ah," he murmured, "but what is this? One guest who vanished, and another who arrived too late." Perhaps the order of things is not quite what it seems." Poirot smiled faintly, as if some small cog in his mind had clicked into place. "We shall see, Inspector. For now, no one leaves this house, until we know who the lady was and, more importantly, why she came." The wind rattled the windows, the candles flickered, and the guests, trapped now in their own secrets, sat in uneasy silence, as Hercule Poirot, the master of the human mind, began his quiet, relentless dance with the truth. The night deepened, and with it the shadows seemed to thicken around Charnwood Hall. The guests had been herded into the drawing-room, their murmured protests fading beneath the steady tread of Poirot's patent leather shoes. He moved slowly about the space, a dark silhouette framed by firelight. Every motion deliberate, every glance weighted with quiet purpose. The air carried the faint scent of lilacs from the arrangements on the mantel, sweet, almost cloying, and yet beneath it lingered something metallic, something that suggested unease. Poirot turned suddenly toward Adrian, who stood near the decanter with unsteady hands. "Monsieur Charnwood, you were the one to find her, were you not?" Adrian nodded quickly. "Yes, I came to fetch my mother's shawl from the gallery. I saw her lying there, beneath the portrait. I thought she'd fainted." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "And when you found she was not breathing, what then?" "I shouted for help, of course," Adrian said, voice rising defensively. "I didn't touch her. I didn't even go near her again." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "And yet you recognized her immediately, did you not?" The young man froze. "Recognized her? No. How could I? I'd never seen her before in my life." There was a murmur from the others. Poirot inclined his head ever so slightly, the smallest of smiles forming beneath his moustache. "Perhaps, but when one sees a dead face for the first time, one's first reaction is not recognition but shock. And yet you said you thought she had fainted. You approached with concern, not fear. It suggests familiarity." Adrian's lips parted, then closed again. He swallowed, looking toward his mother, who stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. She just looked like someone I used to know," he said quietly. "Someone?" Poirot's tone was velvet. "Or some memory you wish to forget?" Lady Charnwood's voice cut through the tension. "Monsieur Poirot, really?" "My son is in shock. This is not the time." "Pardon, madame," Poirot interrupted gently, "but it is precisely in such a moment that the truth begins to slip through the cracks. People reveal much when they are frightened." He turned back toward the rest of the company. "Tell me, was there anyone among you who noticed the lady's behavior during dinner? Anything unusual?" Lionel Grant spoke up, his theatrical voice quivering slightly. "She was terribly quiet. Didn't eat a thing. Just sat there smiling that odd little smile, as though she knew something the rest of us didn't. I tried speaking to her once, asked if she was enjoying the wine. She looked straight at me and said, 'Some flavors linger too, long.' I thought it frightfully strange." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Indeed, a curious choice of words for a stranger at dinner. And did anyone else speak with her?" Dr. Fernley cleared his throat. "She asked me whether I believed in coincidence. I told her I did not. She smiled again, same as Grant describes, and said, 'Then perhaps we shall meet again soon.' I assumed it was some kind of jest." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And now, doctor, do you still assume so?" Fernley looked down, his face pale. "No." Poirot walked slowly toward the window, his reflection framed in the dark glass. "A woman unknown to you all, speaking as though she came with foreknowledge of her fate. And yet, she was not afraid. She played her part with serenity." He turned back, his voice soft but penetrating. "That tells me she was not here by accident. She was here to be seen, to be remembered." The inspector, still taking notes, muttered, "Or she was mad." "Non," Poirot said firmly. "Not mad. Purposeful. Every gesture, every word, Chosen. He paced again, hands behind his back, his eyes half closed in thought. The pearls, the invitation, the seat that should not exist, all are elements in a design. But whose? From the corner, a low sob broke the silence. Mrs. Vale, the housekeeper, had covered her face with trembling hands. "I didn't want to say it," she cried, "but I thought she looked familiar too. I kept thinking I've seen her somewhere, years ago, before the war perhaps. Only, she had darker hair then." Poirot knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Madam, you are quite sure of this?" She nodded helplessly. "Yes, I never forget a face. But I can't recall from where." Poirot straightened slowly. "Then we are no longer dealing with a stranger. Someone here knew her, perhaps more than one of you." A gust of wind struck the windows. The candles flickered. And in that trembling light, Poirot's eyes glittered like chips of steel. "The dead woman's identity will tell us everything. Until we uncover it, we remain in the dark. And darkness, mes amis, is where murder thrives." Lady Charnwood rose abruptly. "Murder?" but the doctor said. Poirot turned to her with quiet gravity. "Ah, madame, the body may bear no mark, but the intention, yes, that may still be murder. Not of the body, perhaps, but of the soul. Someone here wished this woman to die or to appear to die. Either way, it is the same crime." He looked around the room one last time, every face tense, every breath measured. "I shall retire for now," he said softly. "But remember, each of you, lies have a way of echoing in the night. And I, Hercule Poirot, I listen very closely to echoes." As he departed, the guests sat frozen in the glow of the dying fire, the ticking of the clock suddenly louder, more insistent, as though time itself were counting down to the next revelation. The following morning broke beneath a shroud of fog, the kind that blurred edges and made even familiar paths seem uncertain. Charnwood Hall stood hushed, its windows glistening with cold dew, its corridors lined with whispers and restless eyes. The guests had slept little, and even less had they spoken. Fear had settled among them, not loud, not panicked, but quiet and persistent, like the ticking of a clock that refused to stop. Poirot appeared at breakfast precisely at 8, immaculate as though the night's strange events had never occurred. He examined the faces around the table. Pale, strained, eager to pretend at calm, he smiled faintly, poured himself tea, and remarked with gentle cheer, "Sleep, I trust, came to some of you? None. Ah, well, it is most natural. When a soul departs unexpectedly, it leaves the air unsettled." No one replied. The clink of silverware seemed indecently loud. Adrian sat hunched over his cup, staring at nothing. Lady Charnwood's composure had returned, yet her voice trembled when she spoke. "Monsieur Poirot, I would prefer this matter to be handled discreetly. The newspapers—" "Madame," Poirot interrupted softly, "you may rely upon my discretion, but you must also rely upon my method. To uncover the truth, I must disturb what others prefer to leave untouched. Are you prepared for that?" Her eyes flickered, the faintest hesitation. "Yes, I suppose I must be." "Bon. Then let us begin anew." Poirot set down his cup and rose, pacing lightly. "This morning I walked through your gallery again. The portrait of your late husband, Lord Charnwood, it holds, shall we say, a curious position, directly above the very spot where the woman was found. But what is more curious is the angle of her fall. She did not collapse by chance. No, she knelt first. And that, madame, is not the gesture of fear, it is one of reverence." A murmur rippled through the room. Adrian's head snapped up. "Reverence? What are you implying? That the lady came to confront something or someone she respected, perhaps even loved. But instead of reconciliation, she met death." Poirot turned sharply toward him. "Tell me, monsieur, what relationship did your father have with his business associates before his death?" Adrian blinked. My father. He was a philanthropist respected by all. He built orphanages, supported hospitals, everyone admired him. Poirot's brow arched. Ah, but admiration, as we learned last night, is a word that hides as much as it reveals. Lionel Grant, the playwright, gave a short, nervous laugh. If you ask me, everyone who's respected in public has enemies in private. That's what makes for good drama. Poirot regarded him coolly. Indeed, monsieur, and for murder as well. The color drained from Lionel's face. Poirot continued, his tone light but cutting. You, for example, wrote a play some years ago, The Unwritten Confession, was it not? About a woman, wronged by a man of influence. A thinly veiled portrayal of Lord Charnwood, I am told. Lionel's hand trembled around his fork. That was pure fiction. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Fiction, yes, but as I often observe, fiction is the refuge of truth too dangerous to speak plainly. Tell me, did your Lady of Ivory Silk know of your play? I don't know, Lionel stammered. It was years ago. She could have read it, I suppose. Then it is a possibility, Poirot said softly, and possibilities, monsieur, are the roots of discovery. He turned suddenly toward Dr. Fernley. And you, doctor? You mentioned she asked whether you believed in coincidence. Why would she pose such a question, unless she believed your presence that night was not one? Fernley's jaw tightened. She might have recognized me from the hospital. I see many faces, Monsieur Poirot. Ah, but you said she looked different before darker hair. Yes? A disguise, perhaps. And yet her eyes, her voice, you would not forget such details. None. Fernley said nothing. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. Doctor, I believe you knew her perhaps intimately, and you knew why she came, but you hoped her silence would protect you. Fernley's eyes flashed. That's absurd. Poirot smiled faintly. Absurd, yes, but then, murder often begins with absurdities. Before anyone could speak, the butler entered, pale and trembling. Monsieur Poirot, the constable sent word from the village. They've identified the lady. Every head turned. Poirot's hand froze on his cane. Continue, he said quietly. She was staying at the Rosemere Hotel under the name Miss Lydia Marlowe. Lady Charnwood gasped, her composure shattering. Lydia, no. That's impossible. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You know this woman, madame. I knew her once. She was my husband's secretary, years ago, before his death. And why did she leave your employ? Poirot asked softly. Lady Charnwood's voice was barely a whisper. Because. She claimed my husband had promised to marry her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Poirot's expression did not change, but his eyes gleamed like a blade catching light. Ah, so our ghost returns not from the grave, but from the past. And as always, madame, the past, it never truly dies. He turned toward the window, the fog outside thick and unmoving, his reflection merging with the grey beyond. We are closer now, mes amis. When the truth begins to breathe, someone always tries to suffocate it. A deep, uneasy silence fell over the room after Lady Charnwood's confession. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, blurring the edges of reality. The fire crackled low, and Poirot stood motionless before it, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, eyes half-lidded in thought. The revelation of Lydia Marlowe's identity had changed the atmosphere entirely. The ghost at the dinner table now had a name, a story, and a reason to haunt Charnwood Hall. Madame, Poirot said finally, his voice soft but precise. You say this woman once worked for your husband. You also say she accused him of a promise of marriage. Tell me, was there truth in that? Lady Charnwood stiffened. None whatsoever. Lydia was ambitious. She sought to elevate herself through scandal. My husband was too generous, too trusting. He offered her kindness. She mistook it for affection. Poirot inclined his head slightly. So, you dismissed her? Yes. Quietly, to avoid embarrassment. She left within the week. We never saw her again. Until last night, murmured Poirot. And what of your husband's death, madame? 5 years ago. Was it sudden? Her fingers tightened around her teacup. He died of heart failure, she said flatly. The doctors confirmed it. Dr. Fernley shifted uncomfortably. I was not his physician then, he said, but I heard it was quite ordinary. No signs of foul play. Poirot's eyes darted toward him. And yet, he said quietly, Lydia Marlowe returns after 5 years, enters this house uninvited, sits at your table, and dies beneath your husband's portrait. Ordinary? None, my friend. There is something poetic about it. He began to pace slowly, the rhythm of his steps deliberate. The placement of her death, her calm demeanor, her cryptic words during dinner, all speak of design, not chance. A woman does not walk knowingly to her death unless she seeks either confession or revenge. Adrian rose abruptly. Revenge? You think she came here to kill someone? Poirot turned, his gaze sharp. Or to force a truth into the open. But tell me, monsieur, how did you react to this woman's sudden appearance? You seemed unsettled, non? Adrian hesitated. She startled me, that's all. She looked so familiar, like a face from a dream. I couldn't place her. Poirot stepped closer. And now that we know her name? Adrian's throat tightened. No, he said hoarsely. I never knew her. I was only a child when she left. Poirot said nothing, merely observed him until Adrian's gaze faltered. Then he turned away, speaking to no one in particular. The sins of the father, they are heavy, are they not? They fall upon the innocent, even upon those who do not remember. Lady Charnwood's breath caught. What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot? I imply nothing, he said smoothly. I observe. Lydia Marlowe's reappearance was meant to cause a reckoning. Whether she intended to expose a lie or punish the guilty, we must discover. And in that discovery, we will find why she died. At that moment, the butler appeared once more, pale and nervous. Poirot, he said, Inspector Hughes requests your presence in the study. He's found something peculiar. Poirot's brows rose. Peculiar, that word, monsieur, is a siren call to my little grey cells. Lead the way. They followed down the corridor, the heavy carpets muffling every step. The study smelled faintly of tobacco and old leather. On the desk lay a stack of letters bound with faded ribbon, and beside them, a small silver locket. Hughes looked up grimly. Found these among the dead woman's belongings. Letters addressed to Lord Charnwood. All unsigned, but the handwriting matches hers. Poirot picked one up delicately, his eyes narrowing as he read. You will keep your promise. You cannot bury the truth forever. He set it down slowly. Ah, yes. There it is again, the language of the aggrieved heart. She loved him still, perhaps, or hated him enough to act as though she did. Hughes pointed to the locket. And this, sir, inside, there's a photograph. Poirot opened it with gloved fingers. Inside, a small black and white portrait showed Lord Charnwood smiling, proud and assured. But opposite, a second photograph, a much younger Adrian. The resemblance was striking. Poirot's face darkened. Curious, he murmured. A keepsake linking father and son. But why would Lydia Marlowe carry such a token? Unless, his voice trailed off, and the thought seemed to crystallize behind his eyes. He turned sharply. Lady Charnwood, where was your husband buried? In the family vault on the estate, she said, confusion clouding her features. Why do you ask? Poirot replaced the locket gently upon the desk. Because, madame, it appears that the past has not been content to rest. The dead are being made to speak, and I intend to listen." He paused, looking back toward the hall where the guests waited. His tone softened, but his words held an edge of foreboding. "When I entered this house, there were 8 guests and 1 uninvited spirit. But I begin to wonder, mes amis, whether there are others among us who are not entirely alive, ghosts not of the body, but of conscience." The clock struck 9, and in the echoing chime, every face in the house seemed to pale, as though the sound itself whispered of things soon to be revealed. The air inside Charnwood Hall felt colder than the November wind beyond its walls. Poirot lingered in the study long after the others had retreated, his eyes fixed upon the locket that gleamed faintly in the lamplight. It lay open, revealing the 2 faces staring back, father and son, an unspoken bridge between the past and present. His fingertips rested lightly on the edge of the desk, his gaze distant, as though tracing invisible connections in the air. Hughes shifted uneasily beside him. "If you ask me, sir, those letters prove blackmail. The woman probably meant to extort the family, and when that failed, she took poison in despair." Poirot did not move. "Perhaps," he said softly, "but despair seldom dresses itself in ivory silk and attends dinner uninvited. Non, Inspector, this woman did not come to end her life. She came to reveal one." He closed the locket with a click and slipped it into his pocket. "The heart, you see, is rarely tidy in its affections. A woman scorned may seek revenge, yes, but a woman betrayed seeks truth, even from the grave." He left the study, moving silently down the corridor where the portraits watched from their gilded frames, every painted face holding secrets of its own. In the drawing room, the guests had gathered again, though none dared meet one another's gaze. The atmosphere was brittle, charged, as though a single word might shatter what remained of their composure. Poirot entered without announcement, his expression unreadable. "I have learned much," he began calmly. "Perhaps more than I wished. But before I proceed, I must ask each of you, once more, does anyone here deny knowing Lydia Marlowe?" A chorus of murmured denials followed. Only Adrian remained silent. His hands were clenched tight around the back of a chair, his knuckles pale. Poirot's eyes found him. "Monsieur Charnwood, you hesitate." Adrian exhaled shakily. "Because I'm not sure," he said at last. "There's something about her face. When I saw her last night, it was like seeing a memory I never had. I can't explain it." "Ah," said Poirot softly, "but memories are curious things. They do not always belong to us alone. Sometimes they are inherited, passed through whispers, guilt, or blood." Lady Charnwood stood abruptly, her composure fracturing. "Monsieur Poirot, this is cruel. My son has suffered enough. If this woman came here to torment us with lies from the past, then she succeeded," Poirot finished, his tone firm but gentle. "Yet the truth, madame, does not torment, it liberates. It is the lies that chain us." He took a few steps closer to her. "You knew Lydia Marlowe well, did you not? You dismissed her because she became inconvenient. But tell me what became of her child." The words fell into the room like a blade. Lady Charnwood's face went white. "Her child?" Poirot's voice was steady. "Oui, madame. Lydia Marlowe left this house 5 years ago, carrying not only a broken heart, but a secret. A child born shortly after her dismissal. She named no father, yet she returned here last night with a token linking 2 generations. The locket bearing your husband's likeness and your son's. It was her proof." Adrian turned toward him in disbelief. "You're saying my father no? That's impossible." Poirot's gaze softened. "Impossible? Perhaps, but not improbable. And the truth, my dear young man, does not care for comfort." Lionel Grant let out a low whistle, breaking the heavy silence. "Good God, if that's true, then she came here to claim her place to confront them." "Oui," said Poirot, his eyes glinting. But someone feared what she might reveal. Someone ensured she would not speak. Dr. Fernley stepped forward, his voice strained. "There's no evidence of foul play, Poirot." The coroner said no poison, no wounds. She could have died from shock or heart failure. Poirot turned to him, his tone silken. "Ah, but there are poisons that leave no trace, mon ami. Poisons of emotion of the mind. Perhaps she was made to believe her heart would stop, or perhaps she was given something that mimicked death itself. A sleeping draught, carefully measured, to still the pulse and silence the truth." Fernley's jaw tightened. "That's pure speculation." "None," said Poirot, his gaze piercing. "It is deduction. And you, Doctor, you seem most eager to dismiss it." The color drained from Fernley's face. Poirot went on, his voice low but commanding. "You knew Lydia Marlowe before this night. She recognized you. She spoke of coincidence. Yet it was no coincidence that you, the family's current physician, were invited to dinner on the very evening she returned. Tell me, did you receive your invitation from Lady Charnwood herself?" The doctor hesitated too long. Lady Charnwood turned toward him sharply. "Dr. Fernley?" He swallowed. I received it by post, handwritten but unsigned." "I assumed it was from you." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, how convenient. The same as my invitation. Inspector Hughes's too, no doubt. Someone wanted us all here to witness, to play our parts. Lydia Marlowe did not stumble into this house uninvited. She was summoned. But by whom? The question hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on each face, weighing silence like evidence. One among you forged those invitations. One among you wished for this night to unfold, exactly as it has. And when Lydia Marlowe arrived to tell her truth, that person ensured she would never speak again." He turned slowly toward the window, watching the fog curl against the glass. "But the dead, they are patient. They wait. And though her voice is silent, Lydia Marlowe has left her message. It lies not in what she said, but in where she chose to die." He looked back, his eyes burning with quiet certainty. "Beneath the portrait of Lord Charnwood, because, mes amis, it was never just he who betrayed her. It was the legacy of Charnwood itself." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the clock, each second drawing them nearer to the inevitable unmasking. The silence that followed Poirot's last words was deep and trembling, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. Outside, the fog had thickened into a pale wall, smothering the dawn light that tried to creep through the tall windows. Within, the faces of those gathered were pale echoes of their former selves, shadows drawn tight by fear. Lady Charnwood clutched the arm of her chair, her rings glinting faintly. Adrian stood behind her, restless, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving Poirot's calm, unwavering figure. Poirot spoke at last, his voice gentle yet precise. "The legacy of Charnwood," he repeated softly. What a beautiful phrase. N'est ce pas? A legacy built on wealth, on position, on respectability, but also, perhaps, upon silence. His gaze shifted toward Lady Charnwood. "You dismissed Lydia Marlowe to protect your husband's reputation, yes. But in doing so, you buried more than scandal, you buried truth. And now, truth has risen from the grave, dressed in ivory." Lady Charnwood trembled. "You go too far, Monsieur Poirot," she said coldly, though her voice wavered. "My husband was a man of honor. He may have shown misguided compassion, but he would never, never betray his family." Inclined his head slightly, the faintest bow of respect. "Perhaps not willingly, madame. Yet betrayal wears many disguises. The heart may betray where the will does not." He turned away, pacing lightly, his polished shoes whispering against the rug. But if Lydia Marlowe came for vengeance, why die in silence? No letter of confession, no accusation, no plea. None. This was not suicide. This was orchestration. Inspector Hughes, still lingering by the mantel, cleared his throat. Then who, Monsieur Poirot? You've hinted that someone among us forged the invitations, someone who planned this evening from the start. But to what end? Poirot stopped, his reflection glimmering in the mirror above the hearth. To unearth the past, or perhaps to bury it anew. He turned suddenly, his gaze falling upon Lionel Grant. Monsieur Grant, you are a man of words, of drama. You understand the staging of human emotion. Tell me, did you not once say that art imitates life? Lionel blinked. Yes, well, of course. Every artist draws from truth, consciously or not. Then let us consider your art, Poirot said softly, his tone tightening like a noose. You wrote the unwritten confession shortly after Lord Charnwood's death. A tale of a powerful man who ruins a woman and conceals the crime through charity. I read your reviews, how admirably it was received, how uncomfortably familiar its moral was to certain audiences. Lionel's face drained of color. It was fiction, satire. Satire, Poirot repeated, tasting the word. And yet, in your script, the woman dies beneath her lover's portrait, does she not? Her silence condemns the guilty. How curious that your fiction should unfold in this very room. 5 years later, Lionel's breath caught. You think I had something to do with this madness? I received my invitation like everyone else. Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. Perhaps. Or perhaps you were meant to be here to witness your own words become prophecy. The tension in the room coiled tighter. Mrs. Vale wrung her hands, her eyes darting toward the door as though wishing to flee. Doctor Fernley sat rigid, his fingers tapping the armrest in nervous rhythm. Adrian's voice broke the silence at last, hoarse but steady. You keep circling the truth, Monsieur Poirot. If my father betrayed this woman, if she bore his child, then tell us plainly, who killed her? Poirot turned toward him, his gaze unreadable. Ah, mon garçon, you are impatient. But the truth, it does not like to be rushed. It prefers to arrive with elegance. He moved closer, studying Adrian's face with delicate scrutiny. Tell me, when Lydia Marlowe appeared last night, did she say anything to you? Even a single word? Adrian frowned. No. She looked at me for a long moment. I thought it strange, almost tender, but sad, as if she pitied me. Poirot's eyes glinted. Pity, yes. The emotion of one who knows a secret too cruel to keep. You see, my dear young man, I believe she did not come to accuse your father at all. She came to protect you. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Adrian staggered back. Protect me? From what? From the same truth that destroyed her, Poirot said softly. Lydia Marlowe's child did not die in infancy, as the records suggest. That child lives here, among us. Lady Charnwood's teacup shattered against the floor. No, this cannot be. Poirot turned to her, his tone like silk drawn over steel. Madame, the night your husband died, you arranged certain papers, yes? You made generous donations to an orphanage near Dover. Among them, one entry stands out, an infant, registered under the name L.M. 5 years later, your son Adrian sponsors that same orphanage, without ever knowing why. Coincidence, perhaps, or inheritance of guilt. Adrian's face had gone ashen. Are you saying Lydia Marlowe was my mother? Poirot's voice fell to a whisper. So it would seem. You bear your father's name, his fortune, and his place. But hers was the silence bought with exile. She came here last night to see you, to look upon what she had lost. The room swam with gasps, disbelief, horror. Poirot's gaze swept across them all, but someone could not allow her to speak. Someone who feared that truth would destroy the name of Charnwood forever. So she was silenced cleanly, elegantly, without mark or trace. He stepped closer to Lady Charnwood. Is that not so, madame? She did not answer. Her eyes stared past him, unfocused, haunted. Poirot watched her a moment longer, his voice low and sorrowful. There are poisons, you see, that kill gently, without struggle. A dose mixed with wine, perhaps, administered by a steady hand, and a heart convinced it acts out of love. The flames flickered low in the hearth, and for a long moment no one spoke. Poirot's voice, when it came again, was barely above a whisper. The living, they commit their crimes in the name of the dead. But it is always the dead who speak last. For a long, unbroken moment, no one dared breathe. The ticking of the grandfather clock filled the drawing room, each second a heavy toll of guilt echoing through the stunned silence. Lady Charnwood sat motionless, her face pale as the lace at her throat, her eyes distant and unfocused. Poirot watched her quietly, his expression unreadable, neither pity nor condemnation, merely the patient curiosity of a man who saw truth unravel itself before him, thread by fragile thread. Adrian's voice finally broke the stillness, low and trembling. "You're saying my mother killed her? That she murdered Lydia Marlowe?" Lady Charnwood flinched as though struck. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Not murder. You mustn't use that word." Poirot stepped closer, his tone measured but not unkind. "Then tell us, madame, what word should we use? Protection? Mercy? Fear? Perhaps all three?" Her hand trembled as she reached for the arm of her chair, steadying herself. "She came here to destroy everything," Lady Charnwood said, her composure cracking. "To ruin your father's memory, to take from you the name and life you were meant to have. Do you not see? She would have torn us apart." Adrian's eyes shone with disbelief. "She was my mother." "No." Lady Charnwood's voice rose sharply, and then faltered, breaking under the weight of her own denial. "She abandoned you. She chose scandal over sense, deceit over duty. Your father pitied her, he pitied her weakness. He provided for her quietly. But when she demanded more, when she threatened to reveal herself, he cut her off. He died from the strain of it all." Poirot's gaze softened, though his tone remained precise. "And so, madame, you carried his burden. You kept his secret, as loyal wives often do. But when Lydia Marlowe returned, you saw her not as a woman, but as a ghost come to claim what you believed was yours alone. The fear of disgrace, it is a powerful poison." Lady Charnwood's breathing quickened. "I didn't mean to kill her," she said faintly. "I only meant to quiet her, to give her something that would calm her nerves before she made a scene. A few drops from the vial. Dr. Fernley once prescribed for my insomnia. I told her it would steady her heart. I thought it would give me time to think." Her voice dropped to a broken whisper. "I did not know it would stop her heart instead." The doctor's face drained of color. "You gave her chloral hydrate. My God." "Woman." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Lady Charnwood. "You poured it into her glass? Yes? During dinner?" She nodded slowly. When she wasn't looking, she seemed so calm, so certain of herself. I thought it hadn't worked at all. But then she stood, left the table without a word, and she never came back. Adrian stared at her, the horror dawning slowly in his eyes. "You killed her to protect me?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You lied to me my whole life, and then you—" Poirot turned sharply toward him, his tone firm yet almost sorrowful. "Non, mon garçon. Do not judge too quickly. The sins of the heart are not so simple. Your mother acted out of fear that truth would undo what she had spent years preserving. But in her attempt to bury the past, she only invited it to dine at her table." Lady Charnwood bowed her head, her voice thin as a sigh. "You cannot understand. Society forgives many things, but not a stain upon the name. I could not bear the whispers, the pity. I thought if I could keep it hidden a little longer, it would fade. But Lydia, she wanted the world to see her pain." Poirot's eyes gleamed with melancholy insight. "And in the end, she succeeded. She died not to expose you, but to force the truth into the light. Even in silence, she made herself heard. The inspector stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Lady Charnwood, I'll have to." Poirot raised a gentle hand. "Wait, Inspector. The law will take its course, yes. But let us not forget, this was not a crime born of malice. It was a tragedy woven from pride, love, and fear." Lady Charnwood looked up then, her eyes glassy but calm. "Do what you must," she whispered. "I have lived 5 years pretending the dead do not speak. I see now they never stop." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Indeed, madame, the dead are remarkable conversationalists. They wait until we are ready to listen." As the inspector led her away, the fog outside began to thin, and the pale outline of dawn broke across the horizon. Adrian remained standing, motionless, his gaze fixed on the portrait of his father, looming above the hearth. "He looked so noble," he murmured bitterly, "so righteous. But the truth beneath that paint, it's all lies." Poirot placed a hand upon his shoulder, his tone gentle. "Perhaps, but remember this, monsieur. Even lies are born from love, misguided though it may be. The past has spoken. Now you must decide what to do with its echo." Adrian turned toward him, his voice hollow. "And what do you do, Monsieur Poirot, when the truth destroys everything?" Poirot's eyes softened, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "Ah, my friend, then one must create something new from the ruins. Order, as I always say, from chaos." He stepped back, straightened his cuffs, and with quiet finality murmured, "And so, the dinner guest who was not alive leaves behind a table forever altered. Perhaps, in death, she has done what she could not in life, made the living see themselves clearly." As he turned to leave, the morning light finally broke through the mist, falling across the empty chair at the table, the one that had been set for a guest no one had invited, but whose presence none would ever forget. The morning air in Charnwood Hall was heavy, thick with the echo of confession and the faint scent of tragedy that no open window could dispel. The household had dissolved into uneasy silence, the sort that hums with questions no one dares to ask aloud. Poirot, however, moved through it with serene precision, his hands folded neatly behind his back, his gaze drifting not to the grieving son, nor to the door where Lady Charnwood had disappeared in the custody of Inspector Hughes, but to the table where it had all begun. The dining room looked just as it had the night before, save for the light now filtering pale and uncertain through the fog-streaked windows. The 9th chair still sat slightly askew, the crystal glass before it untouched, its rim faintly fogged from the chill air. Poirot paused before it, studying the empty space as though it still contained a presence. "It is curious," he murmured softly. "Even when the truth is known, the silence of a single chair can still speak." Adrian entered quietly, his face drawn. He had not slept. His eyes carried the hollow disbelief of a man who had seen the walls of his life crumble within a single night. "She will go to prison, won't she?" he asked, his voice low. Poirot turned, his tone gentle. "Perhaps. The English law, it is strict, yes, but it also listens. The heart of the matter is not only guilt, but intention. Your mother did not plan murder. She planned silence. It was fear, not malice, that guided her hand." Adrian gave a bitter laugh. "Fear. That's what built this house, I think. Fear of scandal, fear of truth, fear of what others would say. And look what it cost." Poirot nodded, a flicker of sadness in his eyes. "Yes. The price of reputation is often paid in happiness, monsieur. But remember, Lydia Marlowe did not die in vain. She brought light where there was only shadow." The young man's gaze drifted to the portrait above the fireplace. "My father," he whispered. "All my life, I wanted to be like him. Now, I don't even know who he really was." Poirot's hand came to rest lightly on his shoulder. "Then you have an opportunity few men receive to rebuild not from imitation, but from truth. His voice softened. It is not the name you inherit, my friend, but the conscience. They stood in silence a moment longer, the stillness punctuated by the faint creak of the house settling. Then came the distant sound of the inspector's boots in the hall. Hughes entered, grave as ever. "We're taking her to London," he said. "She insists on making a statement, wants to be clear she never meant harm. Poor soul looks broken already." Poirot inclined his head. "She will tell the truth, and that, mon cher inspecteur, will be her redemption." The inspector hesitated. "You think the court will see it now that way?" Poirot's smile was faint but certain. "Perhaps not the court of law, but the court of the heart it will judge more kindly." When Hughes left, Poirot lingered once more, his eyes returning to the silver locket resting on the mantel. He opened it again, gazing at the twin images, Lord Charnwood and his son, side by side. "The symmetry of it," he murmured. The sins of the father reflected in the face of the son, and between them, the silent witness of a woman who loved too deeply. As he spoke, a faint rustle drew his attention. Mrs. Vale stood hesitantly at the doorway, her hands clutching a small folded envelope. "Monsieur Poirot," she said timidly, "this was found this morning in the lady's room, Lady Charnwood's. I mean, it's addressed to you." Poirot accepted it with a quiet nod. The paper trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, elegant, unmistakably hers. "Monsieur Poirot, you will understand better than anyone why I did what I did. I have lived half my life protecting lies and the other half fearing their discovery. Lydia's death was not my intent, but perhaps it was her choice. In her final look, I thought I saw forgiveness. If that is true, then I am ready to answer for all. Tell Adrian the truth will not destroy him. It will free him." Charnwood Poirot read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. His eyes were thoughtful, distant, touched by melancholy. "Even in confession," he said softly, "she seeks order. It is a beautiful irony." Adrian watched him quietly. "What happens now?" "Now?" Poirot's smile was small, wistful. "Now life resumes, monsieur. It will never be as it was, but it will be honest. And that, though painful, is always preferable to illusion." He turned toward the window. The fog had begun to lift, revealing the first faint shimmer of sunlight spreading across the lawn. The world outside seemed newly, made uncertain, fragile, but alive. Poirot drew his coat around him, his voice calm and reflective. "You see, my friend, the dead woman was not the ghost at this dinner. It was the truth that haunted this house. And now that truth has finally been spoken, the ghosts can rest." Adrian followed his gaze, his expression torn between grief and faint relief. "Will you stay, Monsieur Poirot?" He smiled faintly. "Non. My work here is complete. The rest belongs to you." As he made his way toward the door, he paused once more before the empty chair at the dining table. His fingers brushed its back, almost reverently. "The dinner guest who wasn't alive," he murmured, "was perhaps the only one who truly lived." Then, with a final glance toward the fading portrait and the awakening dawn beyond the window, Hercule Poirot stepped out into the morning light, his silhouette crisp against the mist, leaving behind a house forever changed by the gentle, relentless order of his little grey cells. The mist had thinned into ribbons by the time Poirot stepped out onto the front steps of Charnwood Hall. The morning air was sharp, biting at the edges of breath, and somewhere in the distance a single crow cried out a dark punctuation against the fragile quiet. Behind him, the manor loomed solemn and still, as though exhausted by the weight of truth it had finally confessed. Yet for all the silence, Poirot's mind was not at rest. Some faint, discordant note, still troubled the rhythm of his thoughts. He paused at the gravel drive, his keen eyes sweeping the garden. Every detail registered, the damp leaves clinging to the hedges, the broken trail of footprints that led toward the greenhouse, the faint shimmer of dew upon the marble fountain. Order had been restored, or so it appeared, but Poirot had learned long ago that order could deceive. Beneath symmetry, chaos often hid its face. He turned back toward the house. "Non, Hercule," he murmured softly to himself. "You are not yet finished. There remains a whisper in the music, a note unresolved." Inside, the house had grown quieter still. The servants moved like ghosts, their eyes lowered, their steps muffled. Poirot found Adrian alone in the library, standing before the great portrait of Lord Charnwood that dominated the room. The young man did not turn as Poirot entered. His reflection flickered faintly in the glass, his expression hollow. "She's gone," he said simply. "Inspector Hughes took her to the station an hour ago." Poirot inclined his head, his tone gentle. "She is a brave woman, monsieur. To face the consequence of her own action, few possess such courage. And you? How will you face yours?" Adrian gave a weary, humorless smile. "I don't know what I'm supposed to face. A father who wasn't what I thought he was? A mother who killed to protect me from the truth? Or a woman who died to make sure I'd see it?" "Perhaps," said Poirot quietly. "You are meant to face yourself." Adrian looked at him sharply. "Myself?" "Oui," Poirot replied, his eyes glimmering. "Because there is one small thing that troubles me, monsieur. One thread that does not fit within the pattern. You see, I have asked myself again and again, why did Lydia Marlowe come at all? She did not write, she did not threaten, she did not demand. She merely appeared. And yet, his gaze grew distant. Such appearances are rarely without invitation. Adrian frowned. "You think someone invited her?" "I know someone did," Poirot said softly. "And I do not mean your mother. She acted to silence Lydia, yes, but she did not summon her. No, my friend. That role belonged to another." He walked slowly across the room, his fingers brushing the edges of the desk. "There were letters in her possession, letters written by your father, but also there was the invitation to dinner, identical in style, to those sent to the guests. The handwriting, however, did not match Lady Charnwood's. Adrian's voice was barely audible. "Whose was it?" Poirot turned toward him, his eyes narrowing. "Yours." The young man froze, color draining from his face. "That's impossible. I didn't invite her." Poirot raised a hand. "None, you did not consciously. But the typewriter in your study, its worn letter E and faint misalignment, matches perfectly the note sent to Lydia Marlowe. A message composed, perhaps, in haste. The phrasing was simple, almost tender. You are expected at dinner. It is time. Tell me, monsieur, have you ever suffered from dreams? Half memories that do not belong to you? Adrian took a step back, his hands trembling. Yes, he whispered. For years, since I was a boy. Sometimes I see her face, Lydia's face, and I don't know why. I thought they were dreams, nothing more. Poirot's tone softened, but his eyes were sharp. They were not dreams, my friend. They were echoes. The mind. It remembers what the heart is made to forget. Somewhere within you, the truth was buried. As surely as your mother buried the scandal, you must have found something, a letter, a photograph that stirred it. You did not realize it. But you reached out to her. It was you who called her back to Charnwood Hall. Adrian's breath came shallow and fast. Then, I caused this, he said hoarsely. I brought her here to die. Poirot's gaze held steady, filled with compassion. Nan, you brought her here to end the lie. It was not your fault she was silenced. You sought only what was missing in your own soul. A man cannot be blamed for seeking his mother. Adrian turned away, his voice breaking. I didn't even know what I was doing. Poirot nodded gently. That, monsieur, is the tragedy of it. The heart. It acts in mystery when the mind is blind. He let the silence stretch, allowing the young man to steady himself. Then, softly, Poirot said, there is one final thing. The poison chloral hydrate, Yes, it is effective, but it works slowly. Lydia Marlowe would have had time to feel its onset. Yet she did not cry out, did not stumble. Instead, she rose, walked calmly to the gallery, and lay beneath the portrait as though she chose her final moment. Tell me, Monsieur, does that seem to you like a woman dying by surprise? Adrian turned sharply. You mean she knew? Poirot's eyes gleamed. She knew. Perhaps she even accepted it. Lady Charnwood may have poured the poison, yes, but Lydia Marlowe, she drank it willingly. Do you not see? Mon cher. It was her final act of atonement. She came to bring truth, yes, but also to end the pain that truth carried. In her death, she forced revelation without need for scandal. Adrian sank into a chair, his voice shaking. So she forgave my father and my mother. Poirot's tone was soft as silk. Perhaps she forgave herself. They sat together in the quiet for a long while. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting the room in hues of amber and grey. Poirot's expression grew distant again, as though his thoughts wandered between past and present, between justice and mercy. At last he rose. It is done, he said gently. The truth has no more to reveal. Adrian looked up, his face pale but calmer. You make it sound almost peaceful. Poirot smiled faintly. Peace, monsieur, is never free. It is purchased dearly, sometimes with love, sometimes with life. Lydia Marlowe gave both. He moved toward the door, pausing once more to glance back at the portrait of Lord Charnwood. The painted eyes seemed different now, less proud, less certain. The illusion of nobility had faded beneath the weight of revelation. Poirot inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the man's flawed humanity. When he stepped into the hall, the butler was waiting with Poirot's hat and coat. The car is ready, sir, he said quietly. Merci, Poirot replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added softly, if I may suggest, Monsieur le Majordome cover the 9th chair. Let it remain empty. It is her place now. The butler's throat bobbed as he nodded. Yes, sir. Poirot stepped outside once more. The fog had lifted entirely, revealing a fragile blue sky stretching over the estate. The air smelled of damp earth and morning grass, fresh yet tinged with melancholy. As he walked toward the waiting car, he reflected on the curious symmetry of it all. The woman who had been erased, returning to give life to the truth. The mother who killed out of love, and the son who unknowingly summoned both his salvation and his grief. He thought, too, of how death could sometimes restore order in a way life never could. At the car door, he paused, gazing back at Charnwood Hall one last time. The windows glimmered faintly in the light, their reflections like watchful eyes. Somewhere within, he imagined Lady Charnwood's voice still echoing, soft, remorseful, unending. He sighed quietly. Ah, les Anglais, he murmured. They build their houses of stone and their secrets, of silence. But even silence must one day answer. The chauffeur started the engine, the tires crunching softly over gravel. As they rolled down the long drive, Poirot tilted his head back, eyes half closed, allowing the sunlight to warm his face. The case had ended as so many did, not with triumph, but with understanding. And yet, beneath that calm, a single thought lingered. Perhaps Lydia Marlowe had never truly died at all, for in every heart she had touched Lady Charnwood's, Adrian's, even his own. She had left behind a small, indelible spark of truth. When the car reached the bend in the road, Poirot looked out toward the horizon, where the fog dissolved into light. The dinner guest who wasn't alive, he said softly too, and himself, but who taught the living to see. He smiled faintly then, his eyes glinting like polished glass, and settled back into his seat. The countryside stretched ahead in serene order, neat, precise, and still just as he liked it. And behind him, Charnwood Hall faded slowly into the distance, taking its ghosts with it at last.